Hello, everyone. Welcome to BizzTalk World's talk show presented by Clickaway Creatives. Today, we have Shruti Ahuja with us. She is Head of Analytics and Insights, EMEA at Adobe. She has gained extensive experience in the fields of customer insights, analytics, and conversion rate optimization over a course of 15 years. That's more than a decade now, spanning a range of industries such as automotive, luxury retail, energy and environment, media and publishing, consulting and travel, and hospitality at the same time. Her experience ranges from startup companies to SMEs and multinational organizations as well, such as Ralph Lauren, BBC Worldwide, Lastminute, WPP, and Pokerstars, to name a few. So that was quite an influensive bio. I tried my level best to cover it, but I guess it's the time for me to introduce you to the lady herself. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Shruti. Hi, Shruti. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. And thanks for that very warm welcome. So yeah, that is a bit about me. And I'm currently working with Adobe, which is a journey itself. It's been a remote journey, actually, thanks to COVID. So everything's been rather online, which has been a new experience for sure, but a great one.
Yeah,
I'm very glad to be.
It's the new normal. It's the new normal. And we are very glad to have you for this session with us. Thank you very much for joining us. So without further ado, as I said, I tried my level best to cover as much as I could. But it's time for our viewers to hear something about you in your own words. Like, let's start with, if we can understand your journey so far, I mean, how do you see your contribution towards the industry?
It's an interesting one. So I started off actually getting involved. My father is in IT, and he was very keen. He was a very keen programmer, is rather. And he was always very keen for me to get involved in more of the software development side of things. I kind of lost interest at some point, but HTML caught my eye when I was a teenager. So it started off as a bit of a web design fun thing to do. And I guess by the time I got to university, I wanted to do something which was not just web design, but something a bit more business commercial around it. So I ended up getting into business IT as a degree, then did an MBA. And the focus was very much to how do you bring commercial focus to the online industry. So I was there from pretty much the beginning of when things became quite the digital boom, so to speak. And I guess much of my contribution has been around the not just data creation, but data application, right? So, you know, you like over time, I've heard all the buzzwords from big data to data science to, you know, programming in art, you know, you've got your Ultrix, you've got all these suites of products. And you've got a huge amount of data wherever you look. But I guess, you know, it's about now that you've collected it, what are you doing with it, right? How do you really translate that into meaningful action for a business? And I think that's where I come in.
Well, that's wonderful. That's quite a journey, actually, and simple sort of journey, I should say. So if we start talking about data, this is something that you're concerned with primarily. So I mean, how do you think, how to bring a data-led approach towards, all the organizations, irrespective of whether talk about technology or healthcare or education or whatsoever? How do you think they can positively or, use the data and, how they can bring maximum out of the data that they have?
Yeah, I think, I think that's where the real advantage of data lies, where it's all down to interpretation, right? And I think being able to help a business understand what really matters to them from data, both from a commercial perspective as well as a consumer perspective, is super important. And regardless of industry, it still comes down to that, right? What matters to the, what is key for the business for them to improve their business process, but are they consistently listening to their customer? Whether that's a business to business customer, whether that's business to consumer, do they have that consumer voice captured? And how can they slowly but surely begin to cater what they do to deliver accordingly? And I think, it's an interesting one because many companies think they're doing it really well, but then they realize they're sitting on a lot of information and they don't know how to digest it. The next challenge becomes, okay, so here's a few actions. What am I supposed to do with it? My business is very complex or it's too fast moving. How can I ensure that my entire organization is coming on my journey?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, on this go, my random question would be, I mean, just for our viewers to understand, even for my understanding as well, uh, how feasible it is, is it to handle the data? I mean, because it's the data era, I should say. I mean, it's the new currency, I should say, for the corporates. How do you think they can positively utilize it? I mean, because data theft is also a great thing that is happening around everywhere. I mean, we see these app bans and everything around everywhere. So how do you think that an organization or a government should really regulate the usage of data towards all these applications and all these things?
I think it's a very complex area. So I know the EU has done a great job of that, for instance. They've got all these layers, they've got all these checks and balances in place. And sometimes that can be, maybe a step too far, or a bit too restrictive. But actually, if you think about it from the consumer's perspective, it's protecting them from making sure that they're not becoming an object in the entire digital world. An object for sale, an object for spam. And there's so much else associated with it, including peer pressure. And while we're very happy with being able to target and retarget consumers, how do you do that to a level and with messaging that's going to have a positive impact, right? So I think data governance is definitely key as step one, but then it's also up to the companies to have to play their part in social responsibility and ensure that they are leading the consumer to do something positive for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. That's a simple approach. Yeah, of course. And I guess it's the difference between the developing countries and underdeveloped countries and developed countries. I mean, the developed countries have their certain checks, and they regularly, of course, follow it. In developing countries, if I take India as an example, yeah, there are checks, there are laws, but nobody really follows them. And when it's about there are no jobs, there's nothing that you can see around, so you really don't feel to really follow all these corporate laws and everything. I mean, it just keep going. I mean, don't look left or right, just keep on going. So I guess that's one more issue that we have. That was my take on this, but I guess it really doesn't matter as of now. It's your session. So on this go, okay, let's you also mentioned that now, because you're also working remotely, everybody's actually working remotely. How do you think it can bring transformational change with its businesses? I mean, working remotely in the COVID era.
Actually, before we answer that, to your previous question, I think it's a very fair point. There's a long way to go for certain countries to develop that protection for their consumer. But in the meantime, I guess the onus relies on the businesses to do what they best can to ensure they're not selling their data to anyone and everyone, right? Mm-hmm. I think it really comes down to that, because the average consumer will not know what's even being done with the data. You can't expect them to follow a guideline that they're not aware of is being misused, right? So that's to that point, I think. And in terms of remote working, I think it's a very interesting world. So for instance, I actually quite enjoyed my remote onboarding process. I was introduced to many people. I made sure that, I was spending time, booking time with all of them, to get to know them, to understand their world, to have as many offline conversations as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's a difference between you sitting in the same office and grabbing someone for a coffee versus saying, I need to book a Zoom meeting with you, right? It automatically becomes more formal, and you need to make a slight bit of an extra effort to really break down that corporate barrier. Mm-hmm. But I think once you can do that, and the more regular sessions you can have with people, within reason, the more likely you're able to surpass that. And for me, I think the only blocker that I really found was, in my first few months especially, you really need a network of people to understand, who is responsible for what, how can you leverage certain relationships to make sure you're getting the right outcomes. That really, you do suffer from the online or remote era, because you only know who you're introduced to. Your world is just as big as it's, as you've been introduced to. Mm-hmm. So I'd say learning how to circumvent or navigate that is a key point to make sure that you can really establish yourself within a business. Mm-hmm. So it took me a couple of months longer than it would have on a normal working world. But we're finally there, a few iterations in.
Yeah, yeah. That's about the corporate world, I would say. What's about the local business? If I talk about, I mean, these stores that we see all around, they were also closed and everything. And I mean, how do you think that they will come up with all these obstacles? I mean, there are several workers in that. I mean, I know it's not your expertise to answer this question, but it's just to give a personal touch to this. I mean, you have seen it there, I've seen it here. So, I mean, what's your take on the local businesses that they've also hit due to COVID?
It's been an interesting journey actually. So, we've had a lot of businesses around the small businesses, little kiosks and stuff like that. What's really emerged on this side of the world is, delivery services that can help those small companies still get their goods across to at least the local community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think, of course, larger companies have capitalized on that. But there are small independent businesses who said, okay, fine, I'm going to help people in my locality be able to deliver their goods to the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's actually connected people in a beautiful way, where the vulnerable during COVID still had access to their goods, and those businesses really suffer because
Mm-hmm.
they had to be shut down because they weren't able to operate. At least they had a means of making sure that they were getting some income. I think that was really huge. And yes, it did change the fact that you can't go up to them and say, hey, let's have a little conversation, I'm going to buy this. But it still meant that you could at least help them conceptually in making sure that they were able to continue running.
Correct. Exactly. Because I mean, if I talk about, I mean, my side of the world, I've seen my friends starting their own venture or a startup. I mean, everybody's just trying to become an entrepreneur. Some of them
Absolutely.
left the job. Some of them jobs left them, or they got kicked out of the organizations. However you want to call it.
Yeah.
So they started their own venture or something, some kiosk, something.
Yeah.
For them, I have a quick question, a very quick question. What do you think is important? Data collection? I mean, what do you think is the priority or should be the priority of a new entrepreneur? Data collection or data protection?
Very interesting one. I would say data prediction first, then data collection, right? They need to have a good understanding of what they're going to be targeting, who they're going to be targeting from the outset, and they need to make sure they're following that up from the outset, from the moment they hit ground running.
Right. Second question on this go. How difficult is it to protect the data? I mean, for the new entrepreneurs and new organizations that are coming along from grassroots.
Um, it depends on what your line of business is and
I mean,
how.
I'll rephrase it. How difficult or how easy it is for them to do it.
I think again, it depends on what it is that they're trying to introduce to the market.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If they're going completely blue sky, then it's probably a bit of a risk. But then again, you do have market disruptors who've done equally well, as easy as it was to penetrate with the digital world, right? These days, setting up a business is not a big feat.
Yeah.
Here you go, you've launched your website, and suddenly, here you are ready to operate your business. But it's about how quickly are you able to scale that, how well are you able to manage your demand, and how closely can you keep on top of the consumer and what they actually need.
Exactly. These were just two random questions that came up to me. I guess it will help our viewers and of course my friends also to understand it. That yeah, data is the new thing and they have to really understand it to grow further. That's what I guess Amazon did. I was just viewing the Vice documentary and I realized that. All right. Last question would be, of course, as we are talking about the young individuals and young professionals. So, what would you advise, having more than a decade experience with you? What would you advise to young professionals in your industry, or to in a generic sense, to come up with new ideas or to come up with I mean, how should I put it? To come up to the data protection in this new world.
In terms of data protection, I think, as I said earlier, be aware of the power that you have, right? Be aware of the responsibility that comes with it. The moment you have customer data at hand, it's so easy to get swayed and say, right, okay, Here I go. There's another revenue model for myself. I'd say be as candid with yourself as you possibly can, and be as integral as you can on that side of things. But also, generally speaking, data is a huge currency, as you earlier mentioned. I'd say for those who want to get into that industry and become, data scientists, data gurus, get some experience hands-on. Don't necessarily wait for the big break where you're going to get paid, hundreds of thousands. Get some experience to do it for free. Do it. After a point, it's your experience that sells. And you want to get to a point where you're being asked to, people want to pay you for your skill automatically.
Yeah.
So don't chase the big bucks, chase your talent, and make sure you get up to speed with absolutely every arena of it. There's a huge amount of potential coming ahead, especially in the developing market, because there's so much to be done with data itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's I guess one of Indian movies. I guess Three Idiots. You heard of that movie? I believe says run behind excellence. Success is just behind you. So I guess that's what you also want to say, and I guess this makes great sense to all of us, all the millennials who saw that particular movie, of course. And yeah, so at last, of course, I would say, thank you very much for sharing such great insights with us, and we of course look forward to having this great discussion again with you on some other trending topics in the business industry around the globe. And for our viewers, if you like this chat with Shruti, please do like and share this video. And of course, click on that red button and subscribe to ClickAway Creatives YouTube channel to appreciate what we do. And you have more coming in from industry leaders around the globe. This is Sagar from BizzTalk World signing off.